$10 million. That was the price tag on my silence. It started as a joke, a cruel, arrogant boast shouted by the most dangerous man in New York. Dante Valerio the Capo, who ruled the city with a bloodied iron fist, thought I was just a waitress. He thought I was invisible. He threw a crumbling ancient letter onto the table and laughed, daring anyone to decipher the code that had baffled the world's best cryptographers. He didn't know who I really was. He didn't know that by reading those 3 lines I wasn't just winning a bet. I was signing my own death warrant. The air in Loro Nero always smelled of truffle oil, expensive cologne, and fear. Mostly fear. Celine adjusted the collar of her stiff white uniform, keeping her head down as she navigated the maze of velvet booths. She was a ghost in this restaurant. That was the point. Being Celine the waitress was safe. Being Dr. Ball, Selena Rostova, the youngest linguistics professor to ever be disgraced and exiled from Cambridge University, was dangerous. Here, amidst the clinking of crystal and the murmur of high society gossip, she was invisible. Until tonight. Tonight, table 10 was occupied by Dante Valerio. Even without looking up, Selena knew he was there. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted the moment he walked in. The music seemed quieter. The other diners stiffened, and the manager, Mr. Henderson, was sweating through his suit. Dante Valerio wasn't just a mob boss. He was the head of the Valerio Syndicate, a man whose net worth was rumored to rival small countries and whose temper was legendary. "Incompetent, all of you." The shout shattered the polite hum of the room. Celine froze near the service station, gripping a pitcher of water. At table 10, Dante stood up, slamming his hand onto the mahogany surface. He was devastatingly handsome. Dark hair, slicked back a jawline that could cut glass and eyes the color of a stormy sea. But the rage radiating off him was terrifying. 2 men in dark suits. His bodyguards flinched. Sitting across from Dante was a terrified elderly man in a tweed jacket, looking like a librarian who had taken a wrong turn into a shark tank. "I pay you $50,000. Dante hissed, his voice dropping to a lethal baritone. "And you tell me it's gibberish?" "Mr. Valerio, please," the old man stammered, adjusting his glasses with trembling fingers. "It is an archaic dialect, a mix of Sicilian and something pre-Roman. The syntax makes no sense. It's unreadable." "Get him out of my sight before I cut his tongue out," Dante growled. His guards dragged the whimpering translator away. Dante fell back into his chair, running a hand over his face. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of yellowed, fragile parchment. He stared at it with a mix of hatred and desperation. Celine watched, mesmerized. She knew she should look away, but the pattern of the ink on the paper caught her eye, even from 10 feet away. It wasn't just a letter. It was a cipher. "More wine, sir." Celine jumped. Mr. Henderson shoved a bottle of the 1982 Chateau Margaux into her hands. "Table 10, go, and for God's sake, don't make eye contact." Celine took a breath, steeling her nerves. She walked toward the lion's den. As she approached, she heard Dante muttering to his right-hand man, a scarred giant named Luca. "If I don't decipher this by Friday, the commission will vote me out, Luca. My father left the location of the reserves in this note. I know it. Without that money, the Valerio family is dead." "We'll find another expert, boss," Luca said. "There are no experts left," Dante snapped. He grabbed his glass, draining the whiskey. He looked up, his eyes locking onto the parchment, ignoring Celine as she began to pour the wine. "I'd give $10 million right now," Dante said, his voice loud, carrying across the silent restaurant, "to the person who could tell me what this damn thing says." He looked around the room, his lip curling in a sneer. He was mocking the world, mocking his own desperation. 10 million. Any takers? No, just a room full of cowards and sheep. Celine's hand hovered over his glass. Her eyes traced the script on the table. It wasn't just Sicilian. It was a variation of Oscan, an extinct Italic language overlaid with a Vigenère cipher. It was complex, brilliant, and solvable. She saw the pattern immediately. The recurring symbols weren't letters. They were coordinates masked as vowels. She poured the wine perfectly, not spilling a drop. But as she pulled away, the words slipped out before she could stop them. "It's not gibberish," she whispered. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Dante Valerio froze. He turned his head slowly, looking at the waitress standing by his elbow. He looked at her cheap uniform, her messy bun, her fraying apron. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dangerously soft. Mr. Henderson rushed forward, pale as a sheet. "Mr. Valerio, I am so sorry. She is new. She's an idiot. I'll have her fired immediately." "Quiet," Dante commanded, not looking away from Celine. He stood up, towering over her. "What did you say, little mouse?" Celine's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She should apologize. She should run. But the intellectual vanity that had gotten her kicked out of Cambridge flared up. She couldn't stand seeing a beautiful puzzle insulted. "I said it's not gibberish," Celine said, her voice shaking, but clear. "The translator was wrong. It's not pre-Roman. It's Oscan. But it's written backward using a shift cipher based on the Gregorian calendar." Dante stared at her. For a second, he looked ready to laugh. "A waitress," he scoffed. "A waitress knows Oscan." "I wasn't always a waitress," Celine murmured. Dante crossed his arms. The arrogance returned. "All right, you want to play? You heard the offer. $10 million. Prove it." He gestured to the parchment. "If you're wrong," Dante leaned in his breath, hot against her ear. "I take the hand you use to pour my wine, as payment for wasting my time." Mr. Henderson whimpered in the background. Celine looked at the parchment. She didn't need to write it down. She had an eidetic memory. It was the curse that made her brilliant, and the burden that made her unable to forget her past mistakes. She scanned the text. The letters rearranged themselves in her mind. The message wasn't about money reserves. It was something far more personal, and far more dangerous. "Well?" Dante pressed. Celine met his gaze, her brown eyes locked with his stormy blue ones. "It says—" Celine began, her voice steadying. "The wolf does not hide the gold in the den. The gold is the blood of the traitor who sits at your right hand." The glass in Luca's hand shattered. Dante didn't blink. He didn't move. But the air around him turned into ice. "Read the signature," Dante whispered. "It's signed." Selina squinted at the final glyph. "Amore, Gabriella." Dante's face went pale. Gabriella was his mother. She had died 20 years ago. No one knew her pet name for him was Wolf, except his father. Dante looked at Luca. Luca, the right-hand man, was staring at the table, his hand bleeding from the shattered glass, his face a mask of guilt. The restaurant was deadly silent. "Clear the room," Dante said calmly. "Boss," Luca started. "Clear the room." Dante roared, flipping the heavy oak table. Chaos erupted. Patrons screamed and scrambled for the exits. Mr. Henderson fled, but Selina stood frozen, the parchment fluttering to the floor between her and the most dangerous man in the city. Dante pulled a silver pistol from his holster in one fluid motion. He didn't aim it at Luca. He aimed it at Celine. "You," he said, his voice void of emotion. "You're coming with me." "But the money," Selina stammered, stepping back. "You said—" "I lied." Dante laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "But you just saved my life, or you just ended it. Either way, you know too much." He grabbed her wrist, his grip like a manacle. "Congratulations, Kara. You just got promoted." The ride in the back of the armored SUV was silent and suffocating. Selina was squeezed between Dante and the window. The door locks were engaged. The glass was bulletproof. She was trapped. She watched the city lights blur by Manhattan, fading into the distance as they crossed the bridge toward a private estate in the Hamptons. Her mind was racing, replaying the translation. "The gold is the blood of the traitor who sits at your right hand." She had accused his best friend of treason. If she was wrong, Dante would kill her. If she was right, Luca would try to kill her. There was no winning scenario. "Who are you?" Dante's voice broke the silence. He wasn't looking at her. He was cleaning his gun with a silk handkerchief, the movements precise and practiced. "I told you," Celine said, hugging her arms around herself. "I'm a waitress." "Waitresses don't read dead languages," Dante countered. He turned to face her, the streetlights casting shifting shadows across his sharp features. "I had my team run your face while we were driving. No social media. No credit history for the last 3 years. A ghost." He leaned in closer. "But before that, Dr. Celine Rostova, Cambridge University. Disgraced for, what was it, unethical decryption of classified government documents." Celine flinched. "I decoded a historical archive. I didn't know it was still active." "And yet you vanished," Dante mused. "Smart, but not smart enough to keep your mouth shut tonight." "You asked for a translation." She snapped, her fear momentarily giving way to indignation. "You promised $10 million. Dante chuckled darkly. "And you believed a Mafia don." "You really are naive, Doctor." The car slowed, turning through massive iron gates marked with a V. The driveway wound through acres of dark forest before revealing a sprawling limestone mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. "Here is the deal," Dante said, as the car came to a halt. "Luca is currently in a holding cell in the basement of my city penthouse. My men are interviewing him. If he confesses, you live. If he proves his loyalty, it means you lied to sow discord." "I didn't lie," Celine insisted. "The text was clear." "We'll see." The door opened. A guard hauled Celine out. Dante didn't offer a hand. He simply walked toward the massive double doors, expecting her to follow. She considered running into the dark woods, but the red laser dot on her chest from a sniper on the roof changed her mind. She followed him inside. The foyer was breathtaking marble floors, a chandelier the size of a current art that belonged in the Louvre. But Celine only had eyes for the security. Cameras everywhere. Guards at every exit. "Take her to the blue room," Dante ordered a maid who appeared from the shadows. "Lock the door. Give her anything she wants to eat, but no phone, no internet." "Wait," Celine called out as the maid took her arm. "What happens to me now?" Dante paused on the grand staircase. He looked down at her, and for a fleeting second, his expression softened, revealing a man burdened by the weight of a crown he never asked for. "Now, Celine, you pray that you are as smart as you think you are. Because that letter, that was page 1. He turned and disappeared upstairs. Inside the blue room, which was actually a luxurious guest suite with barred windows, Celine paced until her feet hurt. Hours passed. She found a change of clothes in the closet, expensive silk pajamas that fit her surprisingly well. She showered, washing the smell of the restaurant and fear off her skin. But the anxiety remained. It was past 3:00 a.m. when the lock clicked. Celine scrambled off the bed, backing against the headboard. Dante entered. He had changed out of his suit into a black button-down shirt and trousers. He looked exhausted. There was a smear of blood on his cuff that wasn't there before. He held a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He kicked the door shut behind him. "Drink," he said, pouring a glass and holding it out to her. "I don't drink with kidnappers," Celine said. "Drink?" He repeated, his voice strained. "It's a celebration." Celine hesitated, then took the glass. Her hands were shaking. "Celebration." Dante downed his own drink in one gulp. He walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. "Luca talked," Dante said quietly. "My best friend, the man who taught me how to shoot, the man I trusted with my life." He turned to look at her, his eyes hollow. "He was skimming from the accounts for years, and he was selling my movements to the Bratva, the Russians." Celine gasped. I'm sorry." "Don't be," Dante said harshly. "You saved me. Tonight they were planning a hit. If I hadn't left the restaurant when I did, if you hadn't read that warning—" He trailed off. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, far too close for comfort. The smell of whiskey and gunpowder clung to him. "You earned your keep, Celine." "Does that mean I get the 10 million?" she asked, trying to sound brave. Dante laughed, but this time it was a genuine, told sound. "You're relentless. No, you don't get the money." "Then let me go." "I can't." "Why not?" Dante reached into his pocket and pulled out the parchment again. He unfolded it on the bedspread between them. "Because of this," he said, pointing to the bottom of the page. Celine looked closer. Beneath the signature she had read earlier, there was another line of text. It was microscopic, written in a different ink. She hadn't noticed it in the dim light of the restaurant. "What is that?" Dante asked. Celine squinted. Her blood ran cold. It's a coordinate," she whispered, "but it's encrypted with a double-blind cipher. It's the Devil's Tongue code. It was thought to be unbreakable during the Cold War." "Can you break it?" Dante asked, his intensity returning. I might be able to. Give me a week, maybe 2. Dante shook his head. "We don't have 2 weeks. Luca confessed something else before he died." Celine swallowed hard. "Before he died?" "He told the Russians that I have the parchment," Dante said grimly. "And he told them about the waitress who can read it." Dante stood up and moved to the window, closing the heavy velvet drapes. "There is a $10 million bounty on this translation, Celine. But now there is a $20 million bounty on your head." He turned back to her, his face grim. "You are not my prisoner anymore, Celine. You are my asset. And until you crack that code, you and I are stuck together." "Stuck together where?" she asked. "On the run," Dante said. "Pack your things. They know where we are." As if on cue, a massive explosion rocked the foundations of the house. The glass in the windows shattered against the iron bars. Alarms began to wail. Dante lunged across the room, tackling Celine onto the mattress and covering her body with his, just as bullets began to shred the room. "Welcome to the family," he whispered into her hair. The world didn't go black. It went white. a blinding, searing white that erased the luxurious bedroom, the heavy velvet drapes, and the man standing before her. Then came the sound, not a boom, but a physical blow to the eardrums, a pressure wave that sucked the air out of Celine's lungs before slamming it back in with the taste of drywall and smoke. Celine lay curled on the floor, her cheek pressed against the rough fibers of the Persian rug. Her ears were ringing a high-pitched whine that drowned out the world. She coughed, the movement sending a sharp bolt of pain through her ribs. Something heavy shifted above her. "Stay down!" The voice was a vibration against her spine, more than a sound. Dante. He was covering her, his body, a human shield, bridging over her small frame to take the brunt of the falling debris. He groaned a low, guttural sound of pain and rolled off her. Celine scrambled to her hands and knees, blinking through the haze of plaster dust. The room was unrecognizable. The heavy oak door had been blown off its hinges. The hallway beyond was an inferno orange, flames licking at the ceiling, casting dancing, demonic shadows into the room. "Dante," she choked out. He was already moving. He rose to a crouch, shaking debris from his dark hair, like a wolf shaking off water. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow, slicing a crimson line down his cheek. But his eyes were clear, focused, and terrifyingly calm. He checked the clip of his gun, sliding it back into place with a metallic click that sounded loud even over the roar of the fire. "Can you run?" he asked, grabbing her arm. His grip was bruising, desperate. I think so," Celine stammered, her legs trembling. "Don't think. Do." He hauled her up. "Stay behind me. Hold on to my belt. If I stop, you stop. If I shoot, you cover your ears. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good girl." He kicked the remnants of the door frame aside and stepped into the burning hallway. The heat was oppressive, a physical wall that smelled of melting plastic and expensive wood. The automatic fire suppression system had failed. Sabotaged, Celine realized. Her analytical mind, usually her sanctuary, was frantically cataloguing the disaster. Structural damage to the east wing. Fire spreading at approximately 10 feet per minute. Exit options limited. A figure emerged from the smoke at the end of the hall, a silhouette holding an assault rifle. Celine barely had time to gasp before Dante raised his arm. Pop, pop. 2 shots efficient and muted. The figure crumpled. Dante didn't slow down. He stepped over the body without looking down. Celine looked, though. She couldn't help it. The man was wearing tactical gear, a patch on his shoulder she didn't recognize. Not police, mercenaries. "Don't look," Dante commanded, his voice tight. He yanked her forward. "Keep moving." They reached the grand staircase, but the bottom half had collapsed into the foyer, which was now a war zone of gunfire. Bullets chipped away at the marble banister near Celine's head. She screamed, ducking low. "They're coming through the front," Dante growled. "Plan B." He spun her around, dragging her toward a narrow servant's door, concealed in the paneling of the wall. He punched a code into a hidden keypad. The panel slid open, revealing a dark, spiraling concrete staircase leading down into the earth. "Go!" He shoved her in. "Where does this go?" she cried, stumbling into the darkness. "The wine cellar. Then the tunnels. Move, Celine." He slammed the panel shut behind them, plunging them into pitch blackness. For a moment, there was silence, save for their ragged breathing. Then a click, and the beam of a tactical flashlight cut through the dark. Dante descended the stairs 2 at a time, pulling her along. The air down here was cool and damp, smelling of mold and old cork, a stark contrast to the burning hell above. They reached the bottom. Dante navigated the maze of wine racks, with memory not sight. He stopped at a heavy iron door, unlocked it with a key from around his neck, and pushed them through into a garage that looked more like a concrete bunker. Inside sat a single car, a matte black Aston Martin vintage, but clearly modified. "Get in," he ordered. Selina threw herself into the passenger seat. The leather was cold. Dante slid into the driver's side, tossing the gun onto his lap. He keyed the ignition, and the engine roared to life with a feral growl that echoed off the concrete walls. "Buckle up," he said, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "This part gets rough." He hit a button on the dashboard. The wall in front of them began to rise, a concealed exit leading directly into the dense forest surrounding the estate. As the car surged forward, tires screeching on the pavement, Celine looked back. The mansion, the Golden Cage, was a torch against the night sky. Flames burst from the roof, illuminating the trees, and swarming the lawn were dozens of men like ants on a carcass. "They destroyed it," Celine whispered, shock finally setting in. "You're home." Dante didn't look back. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His jaw set so hard, a muscle twitched in his cheek. "It wasn't a home," he said, his voice devoid of sentiment. "It was just a building, and I have plenty of buildings." He slammed his foot on the gas. The car rocketed onto the narrow forest road, tearing through the underbrush, leaving the fire and the life Celine knew behind. She watched his profile in the dim light of the dashboard. He looked composed, almost bored, but she saw the tremor in his left hand, the hand that wasn't holding the wheel. He wasn't made of stone. He was just better at hiding the cracks. The drive lasted for hours. They moved in sonce, a heavy, thick atmosphere filling the small cabin of the car. Dante avoided the highways, sticking to winding back roads that cut through the sleeping towns of upstate New York. The rain began an hour in a relentless downpour that drummed against the roof and blurred the world outside into streaks of grey and black. Selina's adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a cold, shaking exhaustion. Her silk pajamas were ruined, stained with soot and dust. She hugged her arms around herself, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. Dante noticed. He didn't speak, but he reached out and turned the heater up to the maximum setting. The blast of hot air was a small mercy. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, her voice raspy. "Nowhere," Dante replied. "A ghost spot. It's not on any deed, not in any database. My father bought it under a shell company in the 80s for cash." He slowed the car, turning onto a gravel track that was barely visible through the overgrown pines. The car crunched over stones and twigs for a mile before coming to a halt in front of a small A-frame cabin near a dark lake. It looked abandoned. No lights, no movement, just a shadow against the water. "Wait here," Dante said. He got out, gun in hand, and circled the perimeter. Celine watched him through the rain-streaked glass. He moved with a predator's grace, checking the windows, the doors, the tree line. Only when he was satisfied did he return to the car and open her door. "It's clear. Let's go." The run from the car to the porch soaked Celine to the bone. Inside the cabin was freezing. It smelled of cedar and stale air. Dante locked the door behind them and immediately went to the fireplace, stacking logs and kindling with efficient movements. Within minutes, a fire was crackling, casting a warm, flickering glow over the room. It was sparse, a leather couch, a heavy wooden table, a small kitchenette. Dante stripped off his soaked shirt, tossing it onto a chair. Celine averted her eyes, then looked back, gasping involuntarily. His back was a tapestry of scars. old knife wounds, bullet grazes, and the fresh, angry bruising from the debris that had fallen on him tonight. But what drew her eye was the deep gash on his shoulder still oozing blood. "You're hurt," she said, stepping forward. Dante glanced at his shoulder, dismissing it. "It's a scratch." "It's not a scratch, Dante. It needs stitches, or at least to be cleaned." "I'll handle it," he grunted, walking toward the kitchen sink. He found a bottle of vodka in a cupboard and a clean rag. "You can't reach it," Selina pointed out. She walked over to him, her hesitation warring with her logic. She wasn't a doctor, but she was practical. "Give it to me." Dante paused, the bottle of vodka in his hand. He looked down at her. In the firelight, his eyes were less stormy, more weary. He looked at her small hands, then at her determined face. Wordlessly, he handed her the bottle and the rag. He sat on one of the wooden chairs. Celine stood between his knees, trying to ignore the heat radiating from his bare skin. She poured the vodka onto the rag. "This is going to sting," she whispered. "Do it." She pressed the cloth to the wound. Dante hissed, his hands gripping his thighs until the knuckles turned white, but he didn't pull away. Celine worked carefully, cleaning away the blood and grit. Up close, he was overwhelming. The scent of rain musk and iron. The hardness of his muscles under her fingertips. It was intimate in a way that terrified her more than the gunfire had. "Why?" she asked softly, focusing on the wound to avoid his eyes. "Why what?" His voice was rough. "Why did you cover me in the room? The ceiling was falling. You could have run." Dante was silent for a long moment. She could feel his chest rise and fall with each breath. "You're the asset," he said finally. "The money is in your head." Celine stopped cleaning. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Is that all?" Dante looked at her. He looked at her lips, then up to her eyes. There was a flicker of something dangerous there, a hunger that had nothing to do with money. "If you die," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "I never find out what my father was trying to tell me, and I hate unfinished puzzles." He stood up abruptly, breaking the tension. "That's enough. Thank you." He walked to his discarded jacket and pulled out the parchment. It was miraculously dry, protected in a leather sleeve. He slammed it onto the wooden table. "Get to work," he ordered, his tone returning to that of the Mafia Don. "We're safe for tonight, but the Russians won't stop. I need to know where the reserves are." Celine sighed, the moment of connection shattered. She sat at the table, pulling the oil lamp closer. She smoothed out the parchment. "The devil's tongue," she muttered, tracing the microscopic lines at the bottom. "Talk to me," Dante said, pouring himself a glass of the cheap vodka. He leaned against the wall, watching her. "Why is it called that?" "Because it twists the truth," Selina explained, her mind shifting into academic mode. It was safer here. It was developed by a rogue cryptographer in the 50s. It uses a double-blind key. You can't just translate the symbols. The symbols themselves are a distraction. The real message is in the space between the symbols. She grabbed a pencil and a dusty notepad she found on a shelf. She began to measure the gaps between the ink strokes. "Your father, he was a brilliant man," Celine noted. "To use this, he must have been paranoid." "He was the capo dei capi," Dante said. "Paranoia is a job requirement." Celine worked for an hour, the only sound the scratching of the pencil and the crackling fire. Dante didn't move. He watched her with an intensity that made the back of her neck prickle. "I have the first layer," she announced, rubbing her tired eyes. Dante was at the table in a second. "What is it?" "It's a sequence, but it's not coordinates yet. It's a riddle." Read it. Celine took a breath. Where the sinner goes to wash his hands, but the water is always dry. Dante frowned. That makes no sense. A church? No. Celine shook her head. Water that is dry. It's metaphorical. Or maybe chemical ice. Dry ice. Dante paced the small room. A freezer. A meat locker. Think about your father, Selina probed. Where did he go to think? To confess, to hide? Dante stopped pacing. He looked at the fire. A strange expression crossed his face, pain mixed with realization. The confessional, he whispered. A church. No. Dante looked at her. The confessional. It was the name of his private speakeasy in the basement of the old warehouse in Brooklyn. He closed it down 10 years ago. He said he bricked it up. And the dry water? Celine asked. The bar, Dante said, a dark smile forming. He always served his scotch neat. No water, no ice. He looked at Celine, and for the first time there was respect in his eyes. Genuine respect. You're good, he admitted. I know, she replied simply. Dante leaned across the table, his hands resting on either side of her notebook, trapping her. If the money is in the old warehouse, he said, we have a problem. Why? Because that warehouse is in territory that Luca sold to the Russians 3 days ago. We have to break into the heart of the enemy stronghold. Celine felt the blood drain from her face. You have to come, Dante said. The cipher isn't done. That riddle leads to a location, but once we are there will be a lock, a combination. And I bet my life that the combination is hidden in the rest of this code. He reached out his thumb, grazing her cheek, wiping away a smudge of soot. The touch was electric. You're not just a translator anymore, Celine, he murmured. You're the key. And I'm going to get you into that warehouse, even if I have to burn the rest of the city down to do it. Celine looked at him, at the dangerous, beautiful man who had kidnapped her and saved her. She realized with a jolt that she didn't want to run anymore. The puzzle and the man had her hooked. Then let's burn it down, she whispered. Morning broke over the lake in a wash of pale, bruised purples and greys. The rain had stopped, leaving the world dripping and silent. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to embers. Celine woke with a start, her neck stiff. She had fallen asleep at the table, her head resting on the notebook filled with cipher sequences. The cabin was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. Had he left her? Had the Russians found them? Drink this. She spun around. Dante was standing in the doorway, blocking the morning light. He had been outside. His hair was damp and he was holding 2 steaming paper cups. He looked different. The wild, desperate edge from the night before was gone, replaced by a terrifying, icy focus. He had shaved with a dull razor found in the bathroom, leaving his jaw smooth and sharp. He looked less like a fugitive and more like a CEO about to initiate a hostile takeover. Coffee, Celine asked, her voice thick with sleep. Black. No sugar. We need the caffeine, not the comfort, he said, setting the cup down near her notebook. He leaned over the table, examining her work. Did you finish the sequence? Yes, Celine said, taking a sip. The coffee was bitter and scalded her tongue, but it woke her up. The riddle points to the basement, specifically the north wall behind the sinner's seat. I'm assuming that's the bar stool. My father's favorite spot, Dante confirmed. But getting to that stool is going to be the problem. He pulled a folded newspaper from his back pocket and tossed it onto the table. It was a local edition. The headline screamed, Valerio Estate destroyed in gas explosion. No survivors. They think we're dead, Celine whispered, looking at the grainy photo of the burning mansion. They hope we're dead, Dante corrected, which is our only advantage. The Russians have taken over the warehouse. Tonight they are hosting a victory gala to celebrate their expansion into my territory. They turned the ground floor into a high-end underground casino. And we're just going to walk in. We are, Dante said, but not as Dante Valerio and the Waitress. We are going as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, oil money from Texas, boring, rich, and invisible. He kicked a duffel bag that was sitting near the door. Celine hadn't noticed it before. I called in a favor from a contact in town. Put these on. Celine opened the bag. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a dress. It wasn't just a dress. It was a weapon made of fabric, floor-length backless, made of midnight blue silk that looked like liquid water. Next to it was a pair of diamond earrings and a tuxedo. I can't wear this, Celine said, touching the silk. I'm just Celine. I spill coffee, I trip over my own feet. Dante walked around the table. He stopped behind her close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. He didn't touch her, but the air between them grew heavy. Selena Rostova is dead, he said, his voice low and hypnotic near her ear. She died in the fire. Tonight you are not a waitress. You are the wife of a billionaire. You are arrogant. You are bored. You look at everyone in that room as if they are beneath you. He reached out his hand, hovering over her shoulder, before he finally allowed himself to touch her, his fingers brushing the stray hairs at the nape of her neck. You have the mind of a genius, Celine. Stop acting like a servant. Tonight you are a queen. Act like one. The command sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. She turned to face him. And you, she asked, can you play the part of a loving husband? Dante's eyes darkened. He looked at her mouth, then back to her eyes. That, he murmured, will be the easiest lie I've ever told. Three hours later, Celine stood in front of the cracked mirror in the bathroom. The transformation was unsettling. With her hair swept up in an elegant twist, the diamonds glittering at her ears, and the blue silk molding to her curves like a second skin, she didn't recognize herself. She applied the lipstick Dante had provided, a deep blood-red shade. When she walked out, Dante was waiting. He was adjusting the cufflinks on his tuxedo. He looked up and his hands went still. The silence stretched thick and taut. He didn't smile. He didn't compliment her. He simply stared, his gaze sweeping over her with a possessiveness that made her knees weak. It was a look that said, "Mine." "Will I do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dante walked over to her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, lethal-looking pistol. "Strap this to your thigh," he said, handing it to her. "Under the dress." "I don't know how to shoot." "You don't need to aim. If someone touches you, press it against their stomach and pull the trigger." He offered her his arm. "The car is waiting. It's showtime, Mrs. Blackwood." The warehouse, now christened the Foundry, pulsed with bass so deep it rattled Celine's teeth. Outside, the Brooklyn night was cold, but inside the air was hot, smelling of expensive perfume, sweat, and ozone. The industrial space had been transformed. Red velvet ropes, chandeliers hanging from rusted steel beams, and tables covered in green felt where millions of dollars were changing hands. Dante moved through the crowd with a lazy, arrogant swagger that was entirely different from his usual predatory stalk. He had donned a pair of thick-rimmed glasses and changed his posture, slouching slightly to hide his military-grade alertness. His arm was wrapped around Celine's waist, his hand resting possessively on her hip. Every few minutes, he would lean in and whisper in her ear. To the onlookers, it looked like a lover's secret. In reality, it was tactical updates. 3 guards by the kitchen, he whispered, his lips grazing her earlobe. Camera on the north pillar. Keep smiling. Celine laughed, tilting her head back as if he had told a joke. My face hurts from smiling, she whispered back through gritted teeth. Drink your champagne. Don't look at the guards. Look at me. She looked at him. Behind the glasses, his blue eyes were scanning every face, calculating every threat. They were deep in enemy territory. The room was filled with Russian mobsters. At the center table sat Viktor Volkov, the new owner. He was a bear of a man, laughing loudly as he raked in a pile of chips. That's him, Dante murmured. Volkov. He's sitting right on top of the trapdoor. How do we move him? Celine asked. We don't. We cause a distraction. Dante checked his watch. In 30 seconds, the fire alarm in the kitchen is going to malfunction. When the sprinklers hit the frying oil, there will be smoke. A lot of it. That's our window. Celine's heart hammered against her ribs. And if it doesn't work, then we shoot our way out, or we die. Suddenly, a shout erupted from the back of the room. A plume of thick black smoke began to billow from the kitchen doors. The fire alarm shrieked. Fire! Someone screamed. Panic rippled through the crowd. The mobsters stood up, hands going to their holsters. The patrons began to shove toward the exits. Now, Dante said. He didn't run. He guided her firmly through the chaos, moving against the flow of the crowd. While everyone was rushing for the doors, Dante pulled her into the shadows of the VIP section, right toward the bar where Volkov had been sitting. The area was empty, the chips scattered on the floor. Dante vaulted over the mahogany bar. Get behind here! Hurry! Celine scrambled over her silk dress, tearing on a splinter of wood. She didn't care. She landed in the narrow space behind the bar. The wall! Dante hissed, pointing to the brickwork behind the top-shelf liquor. You said the north wall. Celine scanned the bricks. To the untrained eye, it was just a wall. But she was looking for a pattern. Where the sinner goes to wash his hands. She saw it. A faint discoloration on the mortar around 3 bricks at waist height. The pattern matched the Gregorian shift from the parchment. Here, she said, pressing her fingers against the bricks. 3, 7, 1. She pushed them in that order. A heavy thunk echoed. The section of the wall, actually a concealed steel door, faced with brick, clicked open an inch. Dante hooked his fingers into the gap and hauled it open. Darkness gaped beyond. Get in, he ordered. They slipped inside, and Dante pulled the door shut just as the beam of a flashlight swept over the bar outside. They were in total darkness. The air was stale, smelling of dust and old tobacco. Dante clicked on a small penlight. They were in a small, windowless room. The walls were lined with empty shelves. In the center sat a single metal desk and a heavy, archaic-looking safe. The confessional, Dante whispered. It sounded like he was greeting a ghost. He approached the safe. It didn't have a digital pad. It had a dial with letters instead of numbers. Of course, Dante sighed. Another cipher. He turned to Celine. It's all you, Kara. We have maybe 5 minutes before they realize the fire is small and come back to check the cash. Celine stepped up to the safe. She shone the light on the dial. The letters were Greek. She closed her eyes, visualizing the parchment, the bottom line, the microscopic text she had translated in the cabin. The gold is the blood of the traitor. No, that was the first layer. The key was the signature. Amore Gabriella. Gabriella, she whispered. It's not just a name. It's the key. She looked at the Greek letters. She needed to convert Gabriella into the Greek alphabet, then shift it based on the date of her death. Dante. When did your mother die? The exact date. October 14th, he said, his voice tight. He was standing by the door, gun drawn, listening to the muffled shouting outside. 10? 14, Selina muttered. She spun the dial. Gamma, alpha, beta. Her fingers were slippery with sweat. Click, click. She spun the dial left, then right. The mechanism groaned. Come on, she pleaded. She entered the final character. Clunk. The handle released. Got it, she gasped. Dante was at her side instantly. He pulled the heavy steel door open. They both stared inside, expecting stacks of cash gold bars or diamonds. The safe was empty, save for a single leather-bound ledger and a small silver USB drive. What is this? Celine asked, her voice trembling. Where is the money? Dante grabbed the ledger. He flipped it open. His eyes scanned the pages, and his face went pale in the dim light. It's not money, he said, his voice a mixture of awe and horror. It's leverage. What do you mean? This book. It contains the names of every corrupt judge, politician, and police chief on the East Coast, and the USB drive. He held it up. This probably has the bank codes to the offshore accounts where they hide their bribes. He looked at Celine. This isn't $10 million, Celine. This is worth billions. It's the keys to the kingdom. It's the reason my father was killed. Suddenly the door to the secret room shook violently. Someone was pounding on the outside. Open up! We know you're in there, a Russian voice boomed. Dante shoved the ledger and the drive into the waistband of his pants. He grabbed Celine's face, his hands rough, but his touch desperate. Listen to me, he said, his eyes burning into hers. There is a ventilation shaft behind that shelf. It leads to the alley. Dante, you take the drive, I take the book. We split up. No. She grabbed his lapels. I'm not leaving you. You have to, he said. They want me. They don't know who you are yet. If they catch us both, we're dead. If one of us makes it out, we have the power to destroy them. The door hinges began to buckle. Sparks flew as a cutting torch started to slice through the lock. Dante kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was hard, searing a promise and a goodbye all at once. He tasted of champagne and danger. He pulled back, breathless. Go. Run, Celine. Run and don't look back. He shoved her toward the shelf, kicking it aside to reveal the dark, narrow vent. Celine crawled inside, tears streaming down her face. She looked back one last time. Dante Valerio stood in the center of the small room, facing the door. His gun raised a dark smile playing on his lips as the steel finally gave way. Come and get at it, she heard him snarl. Then the door burst open, and the room was filled with gunfire. The ventilation shaft was tight dark and smelled of rot. Celine crawled until her knees bled, finally kicking out a grate to tumble into a rain-slicked alleyway. Behind her, inside the warehouse, the gunfire had stopped. The silence that followed was far worse than the noise. It was the silence of a grave. She gripped the silver USB drive in her hand so tight the metal bit into her palm. She wanted to run back inside. She wanted to scream Dante's name. But the cold, analytical part of her brain, the part that solved impossible riddles, took over. Dante gave you the codes. He made himself the decoy. If you go back now, his sacrifice means nothing. Selena Rostova, the shy waitress, died in that alley. The woman who stood up was someone else entirely. She pulled her torn silk dress around her, wiped the tears and soot from her face, and vanished into the shadows of Brooklyn. 48 hours later. The meeting took place at a private airfield in New Jersey. The rain had returned, a relentless grey drizzle that coated the tarmac. Viktor Volkov stood by a sleek private jet, surrounded by 6 armed guards. He looked smug. He had won. He had the territory, he had the ledger, and he had the hostage. 2 guards dragged a figure out of the back of a black SUV. Dante. He was barely recognizable. His face was swollen, one eye sealed shut, his shirt torn and bloodied. He stumbled, falling to his knees on the wet asphalt. "Celine!" Dante rasped, his voice broken. "Don't come out. It's a trap. Quiet." Volkov kicked Dante in the ribs, sending him sprawling. He looked out at the empty hangar. "Come out, little mouse! I have your wolf. You have my key. Let's make a trade." From the shadows of the hangar doors, a figure emerged. It wasn't a mouse. Celine walked onto the tarmac wearing a beige trench coat, her hair slicked back, her posture rigid. She didn't look terrified. She looked bored. "I'm here," she said, her voice carrying over the wind. "The drive," Volkov held out a meaty hand. "Give it to me, and I let him live." "No," Celine said calmly. She stopped 10 feet away. Volkov laughed. "You think you are in a position to negotiate. I will shoot him right here." He pressed a gun to Dante's head. Dante looked up at her, his one good eye pleading. "Run!" Celine didn't blink. She pulled a tablet from her coat. "The drive is empty, Victor," she said coldly. "I uploaded the decryption keys to a secure cloud server an hour ago." Volkov froze. "You what?" "And I set a demon protocol," she continued, tapping the screen. "If I don't enter a biometric code every 5 minutes, the entire ledger, every name, every bribe, every murder is automatically emailed to the FBI, the CIA, and the Interpol division that hunts Russian oligarchs." She took a step forward. "You kill him. The email goes out. You kill me, the email goes out. You try to take the tablet. The email goes out." Volkov's face turned purple. "You lie." "Check your phone." Celine smirked. "I just sent a sample to your personal email. I believe it's the list of skimming operations you've been hiding from your own bosses in Moscow. If they see that, the FBI will be the least of your problems." Volkov checked his phone. His face went pale. He lowered the gun. "What do you want?" he hissed. "I want him." She pointed to Dante. "Walk him over to me, then you get on your plane and you leave New York. Forever." Volkov ground his teeth. He looked at Dante, then at the tablet. He signaled his guards. They released Dante. Dante groaned, forcing himself to stand. He limped toward Celine, his eyes never leaving her face. When he reached her, he collapsed against her, his weight heavy and warm. "You're crazy," he whispered into her neck. "I learned from the best," she whispered back. "Now!" Volkov screamed. "The code." "Stop the timer." Celine looked at Volkov. She smiled, a dark, dangerous expression that mirrored the one Dante had worn in the restaurant. "I lied about the timer," she said. Volkov confused. "What? There is no timer. I already sent the files." Sirens began to wail in the distance. Blue and red lights crested the hill, leading to the airfield. SWAT trucks smashed through the perimeter fence. "You bitch!" Volkov roared, raising his weapon. But Selina had already dragged Dante behind a stack of fuel drums. Gunfire erupted not at them, but between the Russians and the advancing federal agents. In the chaos, Selina led Dante to a small service exit she had scouted hours earlier. A nondescript sedan was waiting, engine running. She shoved him into the passenger seat and jumped behind the wheel. As she slammed on the gas, peeling away from the airfield, Dante began to laugh. It was a wheezing, painful sound, but it was full of life. "You burned them," he coughed. "You burned them all." "I told you," Celine said, gripping the wheel, her eyes on the road ahead. "I don't like unfinished puzzles, Mahou." 6 months later. The terrace overlooked the azure waters of the Amalfi coast. The lemon trees were in bloom, scenting the air with citrus and sea salt. Dante Valerio sat in a wicker chair reading a newspaper. The scars on his face had faded to thin white lines, adding character to his devastating handsomeness. He looked at Peace, a man who had finally put down his gun. Celine walked out onto the terrace, placing 2 espressos on the table. She wore a simple white sundress, but her eyes held a steel that hadn't been there before. Dante folded the paper. "They sentenced Volkov today. 3 life sentences." "Good," Celine said, taking a sip. Dante reached out, taking her hand. He ran his thumb over her knuckles. "You know." He mused, a playful glint in his eye. "Technically, you never finished the job. You translated the code, you saved my life, you destroyed my enemies, but I never paid you." "The offer was $10 million, Celine reminded him. "I don't have $10 million anymore." Dante shrugged. "I froze all the assets when we went legitimate. I'm just a boring vineyard owner now." "That's a shame," Selina sighed, leaning back. "I guess I'll have to settle for something else." "Oh." Dante leaned forward, his voice dropping to that familiar, dangerous purr. "And what is that?" Selina smiled, leaning in until their lips were inches apart. "Your silence, Mr. Valerio. I'll give you a lifetime if you just shut up and kiss me." Dante Valerio, the man who laughed at threats and silenced rooms with a glare, did exactly as he was told. And that is how a shy waitress outsmarted the deadliest men in the underworld. Celine didn't just translate a cipher. She rewrote her own destiny. In the end, the $10 million didn't matter. The real treasure wasn't the gold hidden in the vault or the leverage in the ledger. It was the partner she found in the fire. They proved that while violence can conquer a city, only intelligence can conquer a war. Dante found the one thing more dangerous than a gun, a woman who knows exactly what he's thinking. They escaped the game by breaking the board, proving that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should fear the most. I hope you enjoyed this twist-filled Mafia romance saga. If you did, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Question for you. If you found a secret code that could topple a crime syndicate, would you try to solve it for $10 million, or would you run the other way? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.